Level 1, the foot soldiers, they die by the dozen and nobody remembers their names. That is the point. The Foot Clan began as something else entirely, an ancient ninjutsu order founded in Japan in 1583, when two rival clans merged into one under a single banner after a legendary duel between Splinter's ancestor and Shredder's ancestor. It was a clan of honor once. Then Oroku Saki took it, twisted it, and turned it into a criminal empire, and the soldiers who march under his symbol today are not the disciplined warriors of that founding generation. In the very first cartoon, they are not even human. They are robots, mass-produced, expendable, so flimsy the show's own writers made a running joke out of how easily they fall apart. That was not an accident. Standard issue foot soldiers had to be a threat you could cut through by the dozen without anyone flinching. Because the network wanted violence without real-world consequence, and killing a robot reads very differently to a parent watching Saturday morning cartoons than killing a man does. So the robots came first, silent, gun-toting, built at the Technodrome, and replaced the moment they were destroyed. In other versions, they bleed. The Mirage comics and the later cartoons put actual men under the mask, street kids and drifters recruited straight off the pavement and trained just enough to swing a katana, a bow staff, a pair of C, a set of kama. In the 2012 series, they even had a name for the pipeline. Recruits trained at Chris Bradford's dojos before being handed a uniform and sent out to patrol. And here's the twist worth sitting with. These soldiers are not weak because they are poorly trained. Some of them fight with real skill, enough to make a first encounter genuinely dangerous for a turtle who underestimates them. They are weak because there are always more of them, and Shredder has never cared how many he loses. A single foot soldier can hold a stance. 100-foot soldiers can barely slow down 4 teenagers with turtle shells because the strategy was never subtlety, it was volume. Send enough bodies and something eventually gets through. That is the entire function of Level 1. Not to win the fight, but to wear the turtles down before the real threat even shows up. Karai commanded them, Dogpound and Fishface commanded them. Even a robot nicknamed Chrome Dome eventually took charge of a squad of them. The foot soldier has no ambition, no face, no legacy of its own. It exists to be the first wall the turtles knock down on the way to something worse. In the first live-action film, the formula changes just enough to matter. There's no Krang pulling strings here, no robots rolling off an assembly line. The Foot are flesh and blood, kids and teenagers plucked off the street and trained personally in ninjutsu, with a lieutenant named Tatsu keeping them in line. That version bleeds in a way the cartoon never allowed, and it's the reason the film drew backlash for its violence, even though, joke for joke, it wasn't much rougher than the Saturday morning show. Whatever the decade, whatever the medium, the job description never changes. Show up in numbers, wear the mask, and don't expect to be the one standing when the credits roll. Look closely at the uniform, and you can trace the whole history of the character in the details. Bug-eyed masks stamped with the Foot Clan's footprint logo. Racks of katana, neginata, kama, and tonfa lined up like a hardware store for violence. Even the clan's street-level allies tell you something about where the Foot sit in the city's underworld, teaming up on occasion with human gangs like the Purple Dragons whenever muscle for hire is cheaper than training more ninja from scratch. None of it changes the math. A foot soldier is a line item, not a character. Cross one off the list and Shredder simply orders another. That replaceability is baked into the character on a mechanical level in some cartoons, where an ordinary foot soldier occasionally gets an upgrade, sturdier plating, a sharper blade, only to still crumple the same way once the turtles find the seam in the design. The lesson never changes across 40 years of stories. Whoever builds the next generation of foot soldier, human, or robot keeps solving for quantity instead of quality, because quantity is the one thing Shredder has never once run out of. Level 2. The Mutant Muscle. Somewhere in New York, 2 street punks named Anton Zeck and Ivan Steranko once looked at a vat of mutagen and thought, sign me up. That decision defines them more than anything that came after. Shredder needed muscle that could stand toe-to-toe with a mutant turtle, so he offered his 2 loyal thugs a deal, and they took it without asking a single question about what it would actually do to their bodies. Zeck came out the other side as a towering warthog, Steranko came out as a rhinoceros the size of a delivery van. Both of them got exactly what they wanted: raw strength, thick hide, tusks and horns sharp enough to gore a foot soldier by accident. But here's where it gets interesting. The mutagen bulked up their bodies and did absolutely nothing for their minds. Donatello summed it up on the spot. Their mutations didn't raise their IQs any. In one now famous blunder, the pair charged the turtles from opposite directions, the turtles jumped clear, and Bebop and Rocksteady collided head-on and knocked each other out cold. That is not an isolated joke. That is the defining trait of this level. Overwhelming physical power wrapped around the strategic instincts of a brick. Shredder and Krang screamed at them constantly, and rightly so, because a plan built around them tends to fall apart within minutes. Rocksteady once got so furious after his own mutation that he tried to attack Shredder directly, only to get flattened before he landed a single hit. Even his own boss could outthink him without trying. Compare that to Tokka and Rahzar, a second pair built the exact same way for the exact same purpose. Shredder had his scientists mutate a captured alligator snapping turtle and a gray wolf, hoping for loyal, intelligent super soldiers. Instead, the pair came out with the minds of human infants, so simple they mistook the word master for mama, and hugged Shredder instead of attacking on command. Same formula, same result. Brute force poured into a mind too small to aim it. And yet the turtles never got to relax around either pair, because a rhino or a mutant alligator barreling at full speed does not care how smart the thing riding it used to be. That's the ceiling for level 2. All muscle and almost no mind. Dangerous only in the moment before you realize you can simply outthink them. The pattern doesn't stop with just two pairs either. Bebop and Rocksteady themselves once accidentally mutated a pet turtle into a rage-fueled reptile the fans would come to know as Slash, and on another occasion helped turn a bull and a mole into two more clumsy hench mutants named Groundchuck and Dirtbag, simply by being careless around a source of unstable mutagen. Shredder kept building the same kind of soldier again and again because, on paper, the math is tempting. Take something already strong, make it stronger, and worry about intelligence later. Every single time, later's never comes. Even their names carry the joke. Zeck and Steranko got tagged Bebop and Rocksteady almost as an afterthought, nicknamed after the getaway van they showed up in during one chaotic escape, and the label stuck because nobody, least of all the two of them, cared enough to correct it. The live-action film versions lean into the same dynamic under different names. Beebs and Rock for short, a mutated rhino and warthog armed with machine guns and an actual tank, played respectively by WWE wrestler Sheamus and comedic actor Gary Anthony Williams. Swap the decade, swap the medium, and the formula holds. Overwhelming firepower, minimal impulse control, and a habit of introducing themselves to whoever's currently in charge, like overeager fans meeting their favorite band. Some comic continuities eventually exile the pair off-world entirely, banishing them to a peaceful, near-Edenic planet deep in Dimension X, as if the only real solution anyone could come up with for two indestructible, uncontrollable mutants was to simply remove them from the board. It rarely sticks. Bebop and Rocksteady always find their way back to New York eventually, because a villain built purely out of strength and appetite has nowhere else in the universe that suits him better than a city full of things left to smash. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite TMNT villain. Let's get back into the video. Level 3, Baxter Stockman. Before he was a fly, he was a genius nobody respected. Stockman built the Mousers, sewer rat hunting machines so brutally efficient that a pest control company fired him for it, terrified of what the devices could actually do once switched on. Shredder saw that ruthlessness and hired him on the spot, and for a while Stockman was the closest thing the Foot Clan had to a mad scientist on retainer, engineering weapons, hacking systems, trying repeatedly to build an entire mutant army from scratch. But genius and results are not the same thing. And Stockman kept failing to deliver. Rule, then exception. Shredder tolerates failure from his soldiers because soldiers are replaceable. He does not tolerate failure from the people he actually needs. So when Stockman came up short one time too many, Shredder activated a mutagen collar around his neck without warning, and a common housefly happened to be buzzing past at that exact moment. The result fused man and insect into something new, sharper, faster, meaner, Stockman-Fly could scale walls, fly, spit acid, and shrug off blows that would have dropped him as a human, all while retaining the acid tongue and wounded ego of the scientist underneath. And then there's the detail that changes the whole equation. He kept his intelligence. A mutant with claws is dangerous for an afternoon. A mutant with claws and an engineering doctorate is dangerous forever because Stockman didn't stop building weapons. After his mutation, he built better ones, obsessed now with reversing what had been done to him and furious enough to weaponize that obsession, at one point concluding that fusing his mutated DNA with pure human DNA might make him stronger than he ever was before. Other versions of the character skip the insect entirely. In the original Mirage comics, Stockman chooses to have his own brain removed and installed in a robotic body of his own design, trading flesh for steel on purpose rather than by accident. Either way, the through line is the same. This is a villain who treats his own body as another invention to be redesigned when the current model stops winning. That is what separates level 3 from the levels below it. Bebop and Rocksteady get stronger and stay simple. Stockman gets stronger and gets smarter about being dangerous. A buzzing pest with a genius-level mind is the kind of villain who doesn't need Shredder's permission to become a real problem. It's worth remembering how this all started too, because the origin says as much about Shredder as it does about Stockman. Baxter wasn't some career criminal looking for a shortcut into villainy. He was a bullied kid who grew into a brilliant, overlooked engineer, mocked by coworkers at TCRI, and fired over a printer he probably didn't even break before Shredder found him and offered the one thing nobody else had: a boss who actually valued his mind. That's the trap. Stockman never wanted to be a monster, he wanted to be respected, and Shredder was the only one willing to fake it long enough to get what he needed out of him. The Mousers themselves tell the same story from a different angle. They weren't built as weapons. They were built as pest control, small mechanical jaws designed to hunt sewer rats more efficiently than any exterminator could, until Shredder got his hands on a replication device and mass-produced a small army of them, reprogrammed to hunt something else entirely, a mutant rat named Splinter, and the family sleeping in his lair. Stockman's tragedy is that his best work always ends up pointed at someone who never did anything to him personally. He just happens to be standing between Shredder and the Turtles, and that's more than enough to make him dangerous. Whichever body he's wearing when the credits roll, the pattern of his story rarely breaks. Stockman promises Shredder a breakthrough, delivers something almost right, gets punished for the gap between promise and result, and comes back angrier and more capable than before. It's less a character arc than a loop, and the scary part is that every trip through that loop leaves him a little more dangerous than the last one. Level 4. Karai. She was raised to believe Splinter murdered her mother. That single lie shaped an entire life, and by the time Karai discovered the truth, she had already become one of the deadliest ninja in the Foot Clan's history. Stolen from Hamato Yoshi as a baby, raised inside Shredder's household, trained relentlessly in ninjutsu until she could match the Turtles' blade for blade, Karai isn't muscle for hire like the villains beneath her, and she isn't a scientist chasing a cure. She's a weapon that Shredder personally forged, and for years she believed she was his daughter by blood. In the older Mirage comics, Karai arrives in New York as one of 5 leaders of the entire Foot Clan, part of a ruling body called the Council of Five, sent specifically to crush a rogue faction called the Shredder's Elite that had spiraled into open civil war after Leonardo killed the original Shredder. She is skilled enough that the Turtles agree to fight alongside her rather than against her, and skilled enough that when 5 members of the Elite face her, down at once, she and the Turtles are the only ones left standing when it's over. Here's one major exception that deserves attention. Unlike nearly every villain on this list, Karai has repeatedly crossed the line into ally, working with the Turtles when it suits her, betraying them the moment it doesn't. That unpredictability is its own kind of danger. You cannot plan around an enemy who might switch sides mid-fight. When she finally learns Shredder lied to her about everything, that Splinter is actually her real father and that her mother's death was never Splinter's doing at all, the fury she turns on her adoptive father is somehow colder and more precise than anything Shredder ever aimed at the Turtles. In one version of the story, that fury and a batch of mutagen combined to turn her into a massive serpent, raw survival instinct wrapped around elite training, and even trapped in that new body she manages to hold on to flickers of her own will. Whatever body she wears, the skill underneath never dulls. Karai fights like someone who is built for exactly this, because she was. There's a version of her that pushes this even further. When Shredder leaves New York on business, he hands her the entire Foot Clan to run in his absence, along with a direct threat: do nothing, obey, or suffer for it. She disobeys almost immediately, sending her own robotic soldiers after the turtles to bait Splinter, still convinced he's her mother's killer. It costs her. Leonardo beats her decisively and warns her not to endanger his family again, and Shredder himself scolds her for stepping out of line the moment he returns. That's the tightrope Karai walks that nobody below her on this list has to. She isn't just dangerous to her enemies. She's dangerous to herself, driven by a grudge built on a lie, capable of brilliance and catastrophic misjudgment in the very same episode. In a later comic run that picks up her story years down the line, Karai resurfaces in New York with none of the uncertainty left. Gone is the teenage rivalry with Leonardo. In its place is a woman leading her own operation, outfitted in high-tech armor of her own design, rather than anything Shredder handed down to her, more than capable of standing on her own without a father figure's name to hide behind. That's the arc almost nobody else on this list gets to have. Karai doesn't just inherit danger from Shredder, she eventually outgrows the need for him entirely. Even her physical presence carries that duality. Athletic, sharp-eyed, dressed in a style that borrows as much from a rebellious teenager as it does from a disciplined warrior, she was never built to look like a typical Foot Clan enforcer, and that's exactly the point. Karai was never meant to blend in with the soldiers she commanded. She was meant to stand apart from them because everyone around her, allies and enemies alike, needed to remember at a glance that she answered to no one but herself. Level 5 Krang, strip away every gadget, every robot body, every fortress, and what's left of Krang is a soft, pink brain the size of a bowling ball. That should make him the weakest thing on this list. It doesn't, and that contradiction is the whole point of Level 5. Krang once commanded a brutal campaign of rock soldiers across Dimension X as a warlord, with a fanatically loyal general named Trog carrying out his orders, until some unexplained incident stripped away his physical form entirely and got him exiled to Earth as punishment, banished right alongside the very engineer who had built his greatest weapon. Most villains would call that the end of the story. Krang treated it as a minor inconvenience. He struck a deal with Shredder. Build me a new android body, and I'll hand you an arsenal beyond anything on this planet. Shredder resisted at first, wary of a partner who might eventually outgrow him, but agreed once he realized he couldn't beat the turtles alone. The result was a hulking mechanical suit built straight from Krang's own blueprints, and a shared headquarters called the Technodrome, a mobile battle fortress capable of drilling through solid rock and punching holes between dimensions. Krang rarely gets his hands dirty in an actual fistfight. He doesn't need to. He commands the resource, the technology, the interdimensional portals, the endless reinforcements waiting on the other side. That's the trade this entry makes with the audience: raw physical power for planetary scale strategy. While Bebop and Rocksteady think as far as the next punch, Krang thinks in terms of conquest and colonization, and he's patient about it, willing to lose battle after battle against the turtles as long as the long game stays intact, spending season after season simply trying to get the Technodrome powered back up. And when the android body finally does take a swing, it hits like a wrecking ball, because underneath that suit is centuries of alien war experience directing every motion. A brain in a jar shouldn't be this terrifying. But give that brain a fortress, an army, and a portal to anywhere, and terrifying is exactly what it becomes. Some tellings of his story push the stakes even higher, casting Krang not just as an exiled warlord, but as the last surviving member of an entire species, a peaceful race reduced to a single furious holdout with nothing left to lose, and an entire planet's worth of technology still under his control. Whether he's a tyrant fallen from grace or the final ember of a dying civilization, the through line never changes. Krang doesn't need to win today. He only needs the portal to stay open long enough for tomorrow's invasion to begin. Even his damaged body tells a story about how far he's willing to go to stay in the fight. When the android suit takes too much punishment to keep running, Krang doesn't retreat and wait for repairs. He switches to a smaller mechanical walker and keeps right on scheming, because losing the better body was never going to be the thing that stopped him. Behind him the entire time stood General Trog and a legion of rock soldiers back in Dimension X, an army that never fully arrived on Earth but never had to. The threat of it was often enough on its own. A warlord who might call in reinforcements from another dimension at any moment is a warlord you plan around whether the reinforcements ever actually show up or not. Later reinventions of the franchise couldn't resist echoing him either. A separate alien species introduced decades later, sharing the same look, the same taste for conquest, and a suspiciously similar name, drew instant comparisons the moment fans saw them, evidence of just how thoroughly one exiled brain in a jar reshaped what an alien villain in this franchise is even supposed to look like. Level 6, Super Shredder. Every villain above this one has a limit. Super Shredder doesn't. In the second live-action film, a wounded and desperate Oroku Saki drinks an entire canister of mutagen with no idea what it will actually do, betting everything on the chance that it makes him stronger than the turtles who just beat him. It works, catastrophically. He doesn't just grow bigger, he becomes something closer to a force of nature, towering, veined, nearly impossible to injure, throwing turtles through concrete walls like they weigh nothing. In animated versions of the transformation, the mutation goes even further, fusing his own armor directly into his skeleton so the blades on his knuckles regenerate after every strike, and fire itself barely slows him down. Here's the exception buried inside the exception. All that power comes at a real cost. The mutagen doesn't just inflate his muscles, it burns away his composure, replacing decades of calculated cruelty with pure animal rage. The Shredder who once orchestrated citywide criminal empires with patience and precision becomes a creature that simply wants to destroy the nearest thing in front of it. That's a downgrade in control and an upgrade in raw devastation, and against most opponents, raw devastation wins anyway. Even his allies learn to keep their distance once the transformation sets in, because Super Shredder doesn't distinguish between enemy and ally when the rage takes over. He becomes less of a general and more of a weapon that no longer listens to the person holding it. In one animated continuity, the creature comes back from actual death itself, resurrected as something closer to a walking corpse, worms and exposed sinew where a face used to be, the mutagen veins still bulging beneath a chest with an exposed beating heart. And that's exactly why he sits so close to the top. Turtles who could outthink and outmaneuver the calculating Shredder for years suddenly find that against Super Shredder, strategy barely matters, because there's no longer a mind to outsmart. There's only a wall of muscle and blade that keeps coming no matter what you throw at it. And the tragedy underneath it all is that he did this to himself willingly, in a moment of desperation rather than calculation. Every other transformation on this list, Bebop's tusks, Rocksteady's horn, Stockman's wings, was something done to a person by somebody else. Shredder drank the canister himself, betting his own body on the idea that raw power could fix what skill alone couldn't. It's the one time on this entire list a villain becomes more dangerous and less himself in the very same instant, trading the mind that built an empire for a body that can flatten one. It's also, notably, the version of Shredder that finally kills him for good in that particular story, poetic in its own brutal way. The armor and the ambition that carried him through decades of schemes become the very thing that ends him, undone not by the turtle's blades, but by his own decision to gamble everything on a canister he never should have opened. Every other villain ranked above level 2 answers to somebody. Super Shredder, in the end, answers only to the mutagen boiling in his own veins, and that master shows no mercy at all, not even to the man who summoned it. Everything that made him formidable in the first place, the patience, the 15-move plans, the willingness to wait years for the right opening. All of it burns off the moment the mutagen takes hold, leaving behind only the appetite for destruction that patience used to keep on a leash. Level 7, Shredder. Every version of him wears a different mask, and every version ends up on top. In the earliest Mirage comics, Oroku Saki murders a rival in cold blood over a woman named Tang Shen and never looks back. In the original cartoon, he frames his own training partner, Hamato Yoshi, for a crime he didn't commit, exiles him from the clan, and then hunts him across the ocean to New York just to finish the job personally. That single decision, refusing to let one enemy simply walk away, is the thread that ties every incarnation of Shredder together. He does not forget, he does not forgive, and he does not stop. In one continuity, the man wearing the name isn't even Oroku Saki at all. He's Chirel, an Utrom war criminal who stole the identity, built an exoskeleton disguised as ancient samurai armor, and ran an entire criminal empire under a stolen name for decades without anyone realizing the truth, eventually rising high enough to sit among the Utrom High Council itself while secretly plotting genocide against his own species. In yet another version, the name traces back even further to a demon called the Tengu Shredder that clawed its way up from the underworld more than 1,000 years ago and had to be sealed away by 5 warriors working together, only for its spirit to eventually possess Oroku Saki and start the whole bloodline of villainy over again from the inside. Here's the detail that separates Shredder from everyone ranked below him. Every villain on this list, Bebop and Rocksteady, Stockman, Karai, even Krang, has at some point served him, feared him, or bent to his will. He is the gravity that holds the entire Foot Clan in orbit, the one constant across cartoons, comics, and movies, spanning 4 decades, surviving death itself in more than one continuity only to claw his way back. Strip away the Technodrome, strip away the mutagen, strip away every soldier standing behind him, and what's left is still the single most dangerous mind in the entire franchise. A man who turned a family tragedy into a decades-long campaign of conquest and never once questioned whether it was worth it. That's the difference between strength and mastery. Super Shredder can level a building. The original Shredder built an empire that survived his own death, his own exile, and even the theft of his own name, and kept coming back for more every time. Even in the very first Mirage comic, the one where the Turtles kill him in their debut story, the name didn't stay dead, it got picked up again, worn by someone else, rebuilt from scratch, because the Turtles were never really fighting one man. They were fighting a title that refuses to stay empty. Take out Oroku Saki and Chirel is waiting in the wings. Take out Chirel and a demon from the 4th century is waiting behind him. Even the modern shows keep finding new ways to bury the same idea and dig it back up. One recent animated version has him arise 500 years ago after a Foot Clan leader strikes a desperate bargain with an Oni for more power, only for the demon's armor to consume his soul entirely and corrupt him from the inside out. A variation on the same basic trade, Super Shredder makes centuries later with a canister of mutagen instead of a demon's pact. Another crossover special drops the 1987 cartoons version of the character into the same room as the 2003 series, Chirel, 2 Shredders from 2 separate universes, each one convinced there's only room in the world for one of them. Every other villain on this list needed Shredder to exist. Shredder never needed any of them. That's why, no matter which version wears the armor, no matter which decade or which cartoon, the name at the very top of the list is always the same one. Which level of villain do you think gave the Turtles the hardest fight? Drop it in the comments.